And good evening, I'm Jonathan Betz, and you're watching Al Jazeera America. We begin tonight with a shocking allegation regarding last December's government cyber attack. The Federal Employees Union now says the security breach was far worse than what the public was told. And our top story this Saturday night, Mexico's most wanted man has been recaptured. He may now face the rest of his life in an American prison. Well, soon after El Chapo's capture, another unexpected twist, as you heard. The country's prime minister this week urged Jack Warner to cooperate with U.S. authorities. It's something both of his sons have already done. I will say that is one of the things I'm struck by, because getting here is not easy. You have to want it.
You have to want it to go through security. You have to stand on your feet.
Now, the labels say St. John's Wort and Ginkgo biloba, but an investigation revealed that some of these actually had neither of these herbs. And I can tell you, the crowds here erupted in cheers, especially during the parts where he talked about Hispanics and immigration. But even today, as you march here and as you join this group, you're worried about your family.
Yes.
The headline in the New York Times this morning basically implying that St. Louis dodged a bullet by letting the Rams go to L.A. What do you make of this? We're not talking a year after Katrina. We're talking a full decade. And you still have things like this and empty lots.
It's terrible.
So you're surprised by what you see today?
Yes, absolutely.
This is a symbolic journey, one that represents not just how far they've gone, but also how far they feel they have to go. So you remember a time when there was no beach on Miami Beach?
Pretty much.
In fact, one Florida county was so desperate for sand, it even considered using recycled glass on its beaches, but decided that was just too expensive. This is a good example of what people in New Orleans face 10 years after Katrina. Overgrown lots that are not just growing over sidewalks, but into what used to be a fairly busy street. And this isn't an abandoned lot. There is still a home back there. But there's still a lot of distrust out there. There's a lot of concern. Do you feel like Iran is truly in this and intends to, in the long term, fulfill its obligations?
I think they are.
And David, it's worth pointing out that a lot of these deals are approved by voters, by taxpayers. These fears that now we're going to have billions and billions of dollars flowing to the Islamic Republic, that it might support some very bad actors all over the world, are those fears not justified? Well, what do you think that's going to mean for Iranian politics, especially since there were a lot of hardliners within that country that are not supporting this idea?
I think that's the reason why Rouhani made sure his team...
Still definitely a fight, especially for the Afghan forces. So what kind of fight do they face now that the Americans aren't necessarily leading it? It's a sensitive subject that stirs passions and sparked anger. Yeah, these are fair questions. He can answer all this.
They're very loaded questions.
When we went looking for answers. I cannot imagine I'm the first to ask you these questions,
Not in
Robert.
such an aggressive manner.
Yeah, you're pretty aggressive here, partner.
A lot of people are saying the health department kind of ignored this county and ignored this problem.
So that'll be rolling out in the next few days. That's all I have time for.
Why hasn't that started yet?
We have to end the interview. Sorry.
So you're ending the interview now? If there's anything you wanted to say, this was your chance.
Football.
A tour of the island, and it's clear to see Warner's touch, from stadiums to companies he's built. How does her story represent what a lot of other people like her are facing? The crimes are so unspeakable.
Yeah.
The horrors are so unimaginable. How did you begin to try to heal from something like this?
It has been a long journey for me. People have really forgiven for those who have murdered their loved ones.
Have you forgiven?
I think I did. Yeah, I think I did.
And now you've been out here hoping for the chance, possibly, to see the pontiff as he drives by here on Benjamin Franklin Parkway. How long have we been out here today?
Like 9-10 hours.
9-10 hours.
Yeah, and we drove 16 hours to come to see him.
The efforts here of the Catholic Church to reach out to everyone, not just Catholics. And I want to show you, they've been passing out these prayer pamphlets. Close to 2 million, we understand, have been printed. And in it are guidelines for the reception of Holy Communion, including at the bottom here, guidelines for non-Christians. Well, David, there is still a lot of anger and pain here for what happened 50 years ago. But as these two sides now talk again, there's also hope of righting what many here see as a deep wrong. Now, since 1965, cigarette use has dropped considerably in the United States, from close to 40% in the mid-60s down to about 20% today. But look at recent years. Since 2004, the rate has barely dropped. In some years, it's actually gone up slightly. This troubles health officials. With this treasure trove, what do we think hackers would do with all of this information? How much of a challenge is she going to face from these other Democratic contenders? So a lot of people buzzing about this speech. What are your thoughts on it? Did she accomplish what she was hoping to? We're seeing rates drop in some of these countries and areas you mentioned. What is behind that? Is it a case of the countries coming to grips with this and changing the culture? Or are the economies improving in these countries so that the families don't feel so desperate and so inclined to marry off their children? This is Al Jazeera America. I'm Jonathan Betz in New York with today's top stories. And tonight we start with that shootout in Texas. Just after midnight, police say a gunman attacked the Dallas Police Department with bullets and bombs. Other news now, a prisoner who has spent more than 40 years in solitary confinement in Louisiana will stay behind bars for the time being. A former GOP political operative has been sentenced to 2 years in prison for breaking federal campaign finance laws. And dozens are still in jail because they cannot make bail. A possible lead today in the manhunt for 2 convicted killers who broke out of a maximum security prison. Baltimore is taking steps to return to normal tonight after a tumultuous week. The U.S. government has been very clear it no longer wants American soldiers fighting in Iraq. But for some veterans, the threat of ISIL is a call too great to ignore. Former U.S. soldiers are returning to the battlefields, volunteering to fight. Where are you standing? Who are those people next to you? Because it looks like they're shouldering their way into your camera shot there. Is it that crowded on the red carpet? Look at that.
Mark, why don't you pan over? This is Kathy Lee and Al standing right next to me. I have no space.
In Argentina, a class of cowboys known as the Jinetiadas are part of the centuries-old gaucho tradition. Al Jazeera's Teresa Bo visited an event devoted to their history and to witness a sport where some say man and horse become one. Well, that does it for us at this hour. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Jonathan Betz in New York. I'll be back with another hour of news at 11 p.m. Eastern, 8 Pacific. And of course, you can always find us online at aljazeera.com. Just keep it right here because Fault Line starts next.